The single dad fixed her car for free. Then she said, "I'm the judge for your case tomorrow." The clang of metal echoed gently through the small garage as Daniel Brooks tightened the final bolt on the undercarriage of a rusted sedan. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the open bay door, casting warm gold over scattered tools, a grease-stained floor, and the man hunched over his work. His hands moved with quiet confidence, the kind built over thousands of hours. Outside, the small town rested under a sky thick with post-rain fog. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and pine. In one corner, a little girl in a pink dress sat cross-legged on an old tire. 6-year-old Sophie, her light brown curls tied into messy pigtails, was deep in concentration. Around her, a collection of spark plugs and plastic caps had been transformed into a miniature tower. She hummed softly as she worked. Daniel wiped his hands and glanced over with a faint smile. "You building a castle again, Soph?" "It's not a castle today," she replied without looking up. "It's a rocket ship. We're going to Jupiter this time." He chuckled. "Save me a seat, would you?" Daniel Brooks, 36, didn't laugh often. When he did, it carried the weight of someone who had lived far more than his years suggested. Once, he wore suits and led engineering teams at a major automotive company. That ended 5 years ago. Falsely accused of stealing prototype parts, Daniel was terminated and quietly blacklisted. The fallout was swift, his reputation crumbled. Then came the accident. His wife, already struggling emotionally, died in a car crash weeks later. From the wreckage, Daniel salvaged only what mattered most: Sophie. Now, he lived simply on the outskirts of a quiet, aging town. He ran a garage that barely passed inspection and raised his daughter with everything he had left. That evening, with fog drifting in and the sun sinking low, Daniel packed up their things. "Come on, rocket scientist," he said. "Time to head home." They climbed into his old pickup and rolled down a winding road toward their modest house. The trees still dripped with rain. The pavement shimmered with the last light of day. As they rounded a bend near Miller's Hill, Daniel spotted a car pulled off to the side, hazard lights blinking weakly through the mist. He slowed. A woman stood beside the vehicle, arms folded, pacing. Her long blonde hair was tied in a loose ponytail. She wore a gray hoodie and faded jeans, no umbrella, no makeup. Just the look of someone at the end of a long, frustrating day. Daniel rolled down his window. "Everything all right?" She looked over, startled, then managed a tired smile. "I think it's the battery, or maybe the starter. I'm not sure." He nodded, pulling over behind her. "Pop the hood." She hesitated. "I have roadside assistance. I was just waiting." "It'll take them over an hour to get out here," he said gently, already reaching for a flashlight. "Let me take a look." The woman stepped aside, watching as he leaned into the engine bay. His movements were practiced and efficient. After a few minutes, he stepped back and closed the hood. "Try it now," he said. She climbed in and turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life. Relief washed over her face. She stepped out, already digging into her purse. "Wait, please, let me pay you," she said. "You just saved my night." Daniel shook his head. "No need." She blinked. "Really?" He glanced back at the truck. Sophie was peeking through the window, watching. Then Daniel looked back at the woman and said quietly, "I want my daughter to grow up knowing that kindness doesn't always come with a bill." She froze, taken aback by the simple honesty of his words. After a moment, she nodded slowly. Her voice was softer now. "Thank you." Daniel offered a small nod, then turned and climbed into his truck. She stood there, watching as the truck disappeared into the fog, its taillights fading like distant stars. Her name was Claire Hammond, and though she hadn't said much that night, she would remember that man, and those words, for a very long time. That night, after dinner, Daniel sat beside Sophie on their worn-out couch, flipping through a battered storybook with a missing cover. The old heater in the corner hummed softly, filling the silence. Sophie leaned against his arm, her small legs tucked beneath her pink dress, her hair still damp from her bath. "Bah," she asked, eyes on the page. "Did you help someone again today?" Daniel raised an eyebrow, pretending to be surprised. "What makes you think that?" "You smell like engine oil, but not the garage kind," she said with a little grin. "And your hands look like you wash them fast." He chuckled and closed the book. "Smart girl." "So?" she asked again, tilting her head. He paused, then nodded. "Yes. A woman's car broke down on Miller's Hill. It was late, and she looked like she needed help." "Did she pay you?" Sophie asked. "No," Daniel said softly. "I told her I didn't want anything." Sophie was quiet. "Because of me?" Daniel looked at her, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. "Because I want you to know that helping people doesn't always need a reward. Kindness is enough." She wrapped her arms around his waist and held him tightly. The next morning, as rain tapped the garage roof, Daniel stood at his workbench, sorting through bins of old bolts and tools. He moved with quiet precision, humming a tune only people who'd known grief seemed to remember. His hands were steady, but his thoughts wandered, back to the life he once had, back when he wore suits, led engineering teams, and had his name printed in industry magazines. All of it ended the day he was accused of stealing prototype parts. Without evidence to defend himself or anyone willing to stand up for him, Daniel was dismissed. The fallout was swift. He was never convicted, but the whispers followed him. Blacklisted, disgraced. A month later, still reeling, his wife died in a car crash. She was distant by then, emotionally and mentally overwhelmed, and never came home from a late-night drive. Sophie was barely one. Daniel rebuilt from the ground up. With grease-stained hands, little money, and a heart walled off from the world, he gave everything to raising his daughter and running the only thing he had left, this garage. That afternoon, the bell above the front door jingled. Mr. Jenkins, a retired mailman whose ancient pickup Daniel had kept alive for years, stepped inside. "Morning, Daniel," Jenkins said with a familiar limp. "Morning," Daniel replied, wiping his hands. "The usual rattle again?" "Always," Jenkins grinned. Then, as Daniel opened the hood, the old man added, "You know, people say you're the last decent man in this town." Daniel scoffed. "That's not saying much." "Maybe not," Jenkins said, softer now. "But it matters. You don't just fix cars, you give people hope. That sticks." That night, after homework, Daniel noticed Sophie's backpack had a torn seam. Most parents might have tossed it, but Daniel didn't like throwing out things that still had life in them, especially something Sophie loved. He pulled out an old sewing kit and a thick spool of industrial thread. Sophie sat nearby, curious, watching him thread the needle. "You're not buying me a new one?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "This one's still got stories left to carry." He stitched slowly, with care, each loop firm and deliberate. "What kind of thread is that?" Sophie asked. "Truck thread," he said with a wink. "This backpack's going to make it to college." Sophie giggled and ran to her art box. She came back with a crayon drawing. Daniel, standing beside a car, helping a woman with golden hair. The sky was pink. Sophie was waving in the corner. She taped it to the wall of the garage. "That's you helping the lady," she said, "so you don't forget." Daniel looked at the picture, then at his daughter. "I won't," he said quietly. And he meant it. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Daniel found it wedged between an overdue utility bill and a fast food coupon, the county court seal stamped on the envelope like a bruise. He opened it slowly, reading the words once, then again, as if a second reading might change them. Petition for custody hearing. Filed by Harold and Miriam Lawson, maternal grandparents of Sophie Brooks. The words blurred. He rubbed his eyes and sat down hard on the edge of his cot. Requesting full custody due to concerns over living conditions, unstable income, and lack of maternal influence. Daniel didn't move. His chest tightened. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, he sat at the kitchen table under the dim yellow bulb, staring at the letter. Bills were scattered like a silent jury, past due rent, repair invoices, a crumpled grocery list. He ran both hands through his hair, trying to breathe. How could they do this, after all these years? The Lawsons had kept their distance, holiday cards, the rare phone call, but never visits, never support. And now, suddenly, they wanted to take her. He didn't blame them for grieving their daughter. But this wasn't about grief. This felt like punishment. He didn't sleep, just sat hunched at the table, listening to the ticking of the old wall clock and the faint creak of the house settling. Sometime after midnight, Sophie appeared in the doorway, her stuffed bear under one arm. Her eyes were heavy, but her voice was steady. "Daddy," she said softly. "Are you okay?" Daniel straightened, managing a tired smile. "Just tired, sweetheart. Go back to bed." She walked over, climbed into his lap, and laid her head against his chest. "I heard you reading something," she mumbled. He exhaled. "It's nothing you need to worry about." There was a pause. Then she whispered, "Pa, don't worry. I'm not going anywhere." Daniel closed his eyes and held her tightly. 3 weeks later, he stood outside the county courthouse, Sophie's hand tucked firmly in his. He wore his cleanest pale blue shirt, pressed as best he could manage, and the only tie he still owned. The knot was slightly crooked. His boots were scuffed, his sleeves too short, but he stood tall. He had no lawyer, couldn't afford one. The thought churned his stomach, knowing that money, not love, might decide his child's future. Before he entered, Sophie hugged him tightly. Her pink backpack bounced on her shoulders. "Good luck, Daddy," she whispered. "I drew you something for later." He touched her cheek. "I'll keep it with me." The courtroom was colder than he expected, sterile, echoing with buzzing fluorescent lights. The Lawsons sat across the room, dressed sharp, expressions unreadable. Miriam met his eyes briefly, then looked away. Daniel sat alone at his table, hands clasped together, breathing slowly. Then the door behind the bench opened. She walked in with quiet authority, blonde hair pulled into a neat, low ponytail, black robe crisp, heels silent against the floor. Daniel's breath caught. It was her, Claire. She didn't look at him right away. She took her seat, adjusted the files, and began scanning the room with calm professionalism. Then her eyes landed on him. There it was, recognition, surprise, and a moment of stillness. Daniel stared, stunned. The woman he'd helped on the side of the road, the one he'd walked away from without even asking her name, was now the judge assigned to decide whether he could keep his daughter. His chest tightened. The courtroom faded. Claire's expression didn't shift, but something flickered in her face. She cleared her throat and glanced down at her docket. "The matter before the court," she said evenly, "is the petition for custody of minor Sophie Brooks." Daniel didn't move. Everything, his past, his failure, his hope, now rested in the hands of the one person who had seen him at his most unguarded, and who now held the power to decide everything. Claire looked up from the file in front of her, her expression composed, the practiced calm of a seasoned judge. But the moment her eyes met Daniel's, something shifted. Recognition flickered across her face. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but she caught herself. Her hands folded atop the bench. Daniel, seated alone at the defense table, looked back at her, then slowly lowered his eyes. He said nothing. There was a silence that hung for a second too long. Claire cleared her throat and turned her attention back to the documents. "Let's proceed." The petitioner's attorney stood and began outlining their case. He spoke with confident detachment, as if reading a script, listing Daniel's shortcomings in cold, factual bullet points. "Your Honor, Mr. Brooks is not a fit guardian. He does not meet the minimum financial threshold for stable income. The child, Sophie Brooks, is being raised in an environment surrounded by hazardous tools and industrial equipment. There is no maternal presence in the home. We believe the child would be better served in a household that offers both emotional and financial stability. From their table, the Lawsons nodded solemnly, their expressions carefully pained. Daniel remained still. He did not interrupt, did not argue. He simply looked down at his folded hands, his jaw tight. When the attorney finished, Claire glanced once more at Daniel. Then she spoke, her voice even. "Mr. Brooks, do you have anything to say in response?" Daniel stood slowly. He didn't have papers or notes. He simply placed his hands on the table, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up just enough to show a faint smudge of grease near his wrist. "I don't have much," he began. "No lawyers, no big house, no extra bedrooms. What I do have is Sophie, and every single thing I've done in the last 5 years has been for her." Claire leaned forward slightly, studying him. "I know what they say," Daniel continued, "that I work in a garage, that I don't make enough. But my daughter has a warm bed, clean clothes, and more love than I ever thought I could carry. I'm not perfect, but I show up, every day, for her." Claire was quiet. She closed the file slowly, then rested her hands on the bench. Her gaze remained steady. "Mr. Brooks," she said, voice quieter now, more personal. "Yesterday evening, you helped a woman whose car broke down outside of Miller's Hill. That woman was me." A few murmurs broke out in the courtroom. Claire continued. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask questions. You refused payment. Tell me something. Why did you help me?" Daniel met her eyes. He didn't flinch. "Because I want my daughter to know that you can do good without needing something in return, even when no one's watching." The courtroom was still. Claire didn't reply immediately. Her eyes lingered on Daniel a moment longer, and then she looked down. The room, filled with attorneys, petitioners, and observers, seemed to fall completely silent, like it was holding its breath. Outside, faint raindrops began to tap against the courthouse windows. Claire said nothing more. She simply turned the page on her docket and resumed the formalities of the hearing, but everyone in that room could feel it. Something had just changed. The courtroom had never felt so quiet. Claire sat behind the bench, her hands still, her posture straight. She let the silence settle for a moment longer, then looked up at the room, her gaze sweeping slowly across the faces before her. "I would like to make a statement," she said, her voice firm but composed. "Not just as a judge, but as the person who was helped yesterday by the man standing before us." A murmur spread across the courtroom. Even the Lawsons shifted in their seats. Claire continued. "Last night, my car broke down on the side of the road near Miller's Hill. It was raining, foggy. My phone battery was dying. I was alone, in an unfamiliar part of town, unsure of what to do, and then someone pulled over." She paused, her eyes now fixed on Daniel. "That someone was Mr. Brooks, a stranger to me. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't question why I was there. He simply asked what I needed and got to work. He fixed my car with nothing but a flashlight and his hands. He refused payment." Her voice was steady, but there was something soft in it now, something that reached past the courtroom walls. In that moment, I was scared. I was vulnerable. But Mr. Brooks didn't just fix my engine. He calmed my fear. He reminded me that decency still exists, that not everyone does things for recognition or reward, that sometimes people are just good. She turned to the petitioners. "I've read your concerns. I understand them. But being a parent isn't about income brackets or polished floors. It's about showing up. It's about sacrifice, character, and love." Then she looked back at Daniel. "This man has chosen a quiet life, not because he lacks ambition, but because he puts his daughter first. He earns a living through honest work. He raises his child in a home where love outweighs luxury. And above all, he teaches her through action, not just words." The courtroom was silent. Claire reached for the file in front of her, flipping to the final page. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. Then she looked directly at Daniel and read the decision aloud. This court finds that Mr. Daniel Brooks meets the criteria for full custody of his daughter, Sophie Brooks. The petition for transfer of custody is hereby denied. There was a small gasp, followed by the sound of someone quietly weeping, Miriam Lawson, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Claire's voice softened for the last sentence. "And I hope Sophie grows up knowing that kindness is never forgotten, and that love, real love, makes a home, not just a house." Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. His shoulders trembled. He blinked rapidly and then lowered his head as tears slipped down his face. From the back of the courtroom, Sophie broke free of the social worker's gentle hold and ran straight into her father's arms. He caught her, pulling her tightly to his chest, burying his face in her hair as she whispered, "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." Claire stood quietly, watching them. For a moment, she wasn't the judge behind the bench, or the woman with the black robe. She was simply Claire, the woman on the roadside who had been reminded what it meant to trust. She gathered her papers, rose from her chair, and offered a small, almost imperceptible smile in Daniel's direction before exiting the courtroom. Behind her, a father held his daughter with everything he had left, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he hadn't lost, he had finally won. The sun was dipping low when Claire pulled up in front of the garage. Daniel was bent over the rusted frame of an old station wagon, welding mask perched on his head, sparks briefly lighting the fading daylight. He didn't notice her at first. The clang of metal and hum of tools filled the air until he paused to wipe his brow and caught the silhouette by the entrance. Claire stood quietly, dressed in a light gray blouse and jeans. Her blonde hair was pulled back neatly, held in place with a small silver clip that shimmered faintly in the sun. She still carried that calm, poised air, but now something softer lingered beneath it. Daniel blinked, surprised. He stood upright, rubbing his hands on a rag tucked into his pocket. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Claire said with a small smile. "No, not at all," he replied, slightly breathless. "I just didn't expect to see you again so soon." She stepped forward and held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I was at the courthouse library today. They're clearing out shelves. I saw this and thought of you." He untied the string and opened the wrapping. Inside was a worn but well-kept copy of the Complete Guide to Vintage Car Engines. Daniel's eyes lit up. "I've actually been trying to find this for years," he said, running his fingers over the faded cover. "It's been out of print since 1987, Claire finished. "I looked it up." Daniel smiled, genuinely. "Thank you." A pause settled between them, quiet but easy. Something had shifted. Neither spoke of it, but both felt it. "Would you like some tea?" he asked. "I'd love that," Claire replied. Inside the garage's back room, Daniel brought out two mismatched mugs, one chipped, the other a faded souvenir from an old mechanics' convention. They were spotless. The tea was simple, black, steeped in an aging kettle. He placed the tray down with care, like it was something delicate. Claire noticed. She reached into her bag, pulled out a tissue, and took his hand. She turned it palm up and gently wiped a small smudge of grease from the edge of his thumb. Neither said a word. It was a small gesture, quiet, thoughtful, but it said more than either of them could have put into words. A few minutes later, Sophie burst through the side door, her footsteps echoing on the concrete. "Dad, I found the..." She froze when she saw Claire sitting there. Claire turned with a smile. "Hello again, Sophie." The little girl tilted her head. "You're not wearing your robe." Claire laughed softly. "No, I left that at work today." Sophie walked over, her eyes curious. Claire knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Do you know," Claire said gently, "that you're the reason your dad is as strong as he is?" Sophie looked from her to Daniel, then nodded. "I know." Claire smiled again. Sophie added, "You're kind of like my mom." Claire blinked. "Why do you say that?" "Because you smile the same," Sophie replied. She had a nice smile too. Daniel's grip tightened slightly around his mug. Claire reached out and softly brushed a strand of Sophie's hair from her face. "That means a lot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The afternoon drifted on. The three of them sat together at the old wooden table, talking not about courts or cars, but about music, books, and Sophie's upcoming school play. Daniel laughed more than he had in a long time. Claire listened intently, her eyes warm and present. Outside, the sun sank below the treetops, casting golden rays through the wide garage doors. Dust floated through the light. The tools and scattered parts glowed amber in the fading day. For the first time in years, the garage didn't feel like a cage. It felt like home, or the beginning of one. The breeze was gentle that Sunday morning, rustling the trees along the edge of the park. Sunlight filtered through the branches in golden threads, casting playful shadows across the walking paths. Children laughed in the distance. Dogs barked. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played soft jazz on a saxophone. Claire was already seated on a park bench when Daniel and Sophie arrived. She stood as they approached, offering a warm smile. Her blonde hair wasn't tied back. It fell in soft waves around her face, catching the light like silk. She wore a beige coat, simple and elegant, and her expression was different, softer, less guarded. Sophie didn't wait. She hopped on her small bike and sped toward the playground loop, her pink dress fluttering like a cape. Daniel sat beside Claire on the bench, their knees nearly touching. For a moment, they watched in silence as Sophie's bike looped through the path. "You let her ride far," Claire said gently. "She always comes back," Daniel replied. "I think kids know where home is." Claire looked down at her hands, then toward the trees. "I used to believe in things like that," she said. Her voice wasn't bitter, just distant, like someone speaking to a version of herself long buried. Daniel didn't press her. He waited. Claire drew in a breath. "Before I became a judge, I worked in legal aid. I fought for people who had nothing, especially the ones no one else believed in. One of them was a man who'd been in and out of prison, drugs, theft, bad decisions, but I saw something in him. I thought he was ready to change." Daniel listened, quiet, steady. "I helped him get released early, helped him find work. He said I saved his life." Her voice dropped. "We started seeing each other. Slowly, it became more. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving someone a second chance." She paused. "I married him." Daniel's jaw tensed slightly, but he said nothing. "A year later, he emptied my savings, left a note, and vanished." Her words hung in the space between them. I was humiliated. My friends said I was naive. My colleagues questioned everything I stood for. After that, I promised myself, no more mistakes, no more emotions clouding my judgment. Daniel still didn't speak. Instead, he reached toward her coat. One of the drawstrings had slipped loose. He tied it back into place, quietly, carefully, without looking up. Claire glanced down at his hands, then met his eyes. He gave her a small, calm smile. "Everything can be fixed," he said. "If someone's patient enough." She looked at him for a long moment, and her eyes shimmered. The tears didn't fall, but they were there, just beneath the surface. And in her gaze, there wasn't gratitude or pity. It was something deeper, a quiet understanding, the kind only shared scars can create. Just then, Sophie came riding up, her cheeks pink from the wind. She skidded to a stop in front of them, jumped off the bike, and plucked a small purple flower from the grass. She ran over and held it out. "For you," she said, beaming. Claire blinked and took the flower gently, like it was something fragile and royal. "Thank you, sweetheart." Sophie grinned. "Can you be the princess's teacher?" Claire laughed, caught off guard. "A teacher for a princess?" Sophie nodded seriously. "You're nice, and you smile like my mom did." Claire looked at the flower again. Her voice softened. "Maybe, I could be the princess's stepmother." Daniel chuckled, a warm sound that melted into the breeze. Sophie beamed, and Claire, still holding the flower, smiled in a way she hadn't in years, not as a judge or a woman defending herself, but as someone who, just maybe, could believe again. The breeze was light that late spring afternoon, as Daniel tightened the final bolt beneath the hood of a faded red pickup. The garage had changed over the past few months, not in flashy ways, but in small, meaningful ones. The tools were organized, the floor stayed clean, a fresh coat of white paint brightened the old door. Most noticeably, more cars now lined the lot. After the local paper ran a story titled "The Mechanic Who Helped a Judge and Won More Than a Case," business picked up. Daniel never mentioned the article. He didn't care for attention. What mattered was the work and the quiet life he was building behind the garage doors. In the back kitchen, Claire folded a basket of laundry, sunlight catching the soft gold in her loose blonde hair. She had transferred to the local courthouse after the custody hearing, officially for community-focused work, but anyone who knew her could see the real reason. She had come to stay close to the two people who had changed her heart. Sophie came bursting into the garage in her pink dress, little braids bouncing, clutching a handmade card dusted in glitter. "Miss Claire," she called, running toward her. "I made you something." Claire knelt with a warm smile and took the card. "It's for my school play tomorrow. I'm a sunflower," Sophie beamed, "and I want you to sit in the front row, right next to Dad." Claire looked at the card. Her throat tightened, but her smile didn't falter. She brushed Sophie's cheek. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it." That night, after the play, where Sophie smiled ear to ear and took the grandest bow, Daniel, Claire, and Sophie walked home under a sky full of stars. Their small house sat quietly at the end of a gravel path, weathered but glowing with warmth. Daniel made hot cocoa in mismatched mugs, while Claire folded Sophie's costume. Sophie twirled through the room, humming the song from her performance. Later, Daniel stepped outside with a wrench and an old swing seat he'd been fixing. In the backyard, a rusted swing frame still stood. Claire followed him with a blanket over her arm. Together, they secured the swing into place. Sophie ran outside barefoot, laughing, and jumped on without hesitation. "Ready?" Claire asked, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders as Daniel stood beside her. He nodded. Claire gave Sophie a gentle push, and the swing groaned softly as it lifted. Sophie's laughter echoed into the night. "Daddy, Miss Claire," she shouted mid-swing, full of joy. "We're like a real family now, right?" Daniel turned to Claire. She met his eyes, then reached for his hand. Their fingers laced together in a quiet answer. A few weeks later, a new wooden sign was mounted above the garage entrance. The letters were hand-carved, slightly uneven but full of care. Brooks and Hammond, garage and home. The ampersand was shaped like a small wrench. That same afternoon, a young couple pulled into the driveway, asking about a noise in their brakes. Claire greeted them with a clipboard in hand, still in her judge's blazer, but wearing sneakers underneath. Daniel appeared from under a lifted hood, wiping grease from his hands with a shop towel, smiling as he approached. From the porch, Sophie came running in a new pink dress, barefoot again, waving with one hand and holding a juice box in the other. The three of them stood together in the sunlight, nothing flashy, nothing loud, just a family. Not built by blood or convenience, but by kindness, patience, and the quiet courage it takes to believe in second chances. And as the wind moved softly through the open garage, the words seemed to echo like a whisper through time. He only fixed her car that day, but she fixed his heart forever. Thank you for joining us for this heartfelt journey. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you of the quiet power of kindness, we'd love for you to become a part of our growing community. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the hype button to support the Soul Stirring Stories channel, where every story is crafted to heal, to move, and to remind us that love often finds us in the most unexpected places. We've got more powerful, emotional, real-life stories coming your way, and trust us, you won't want to miss them. Until next time, take care of your heart and each other.